that one of the reporting and the thought process is they're trying to force the Venezuelan military to kind of panic and maybe lose money, and then that way they can force Maduro out of power.
Is U.S. info on Venezuela drug boats likely coming from the Mexican cartel chief. Intelligence that led to recent U.S. military strikes on drug boats off of Venezuela's coast likely came from Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a top leader of the Mexico's Sinaloa Cartel, according to reports. Zambada, who recently struck a plea deal with U.S. authorities, agreed to plead guilty to charges including drug trafficking, murder plots, and torture in exchange for a life sentence instead of the death penalty. His cooperation allegedly exposes how Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles collaborates with the Sinaloa Cartel in drug smuggling operations. Following the deal, the Trump administration deployed warships to Venezuela's coast and carried out strikes that killed 14 alleged traffickers in 2 incidents. The intelligence also identified high-level figures such as Juan Jose Ponce Felix, known as El Ruso, for whom the U.S. is now offering a $5 million reward. Meanwhile, U.S. agencies are intensifying efforts against Cartel de los Soles, designating it as a narco-terrorism organization linked to Nicolas Maduro's regime. Okay, so the question. If U.S. intelligence on Venezuela's drug trade is now coming from cartel bosses like El Mayo, what does that actually say about who really controls the flow of information? And are we risking becoming dependent on criminals to fight other criminals? I mean, and that's just like the sliver into this question. So we can go as deep on this one as you want.
So I saw that report. Look, I'm skeptical. And the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical is because Mayo Zambada has been in prison for over a year now.
Yeah.
Right. So now, can Mayo Zambada give more amplifying information? Because look, it's been very well known. I mean, already in the public domain, the role of the Cartel de los Soles, or for all intents and purposes, really what the Cartel de los Soles really is just a higher echelon of the Venezuelan military. We've known their interactions with various cartels. We've known, for example, the cocaine, obviously the vast majority of cocaine produced in the world is in Colombia. We've known of the Sinaloa Cartel presence in Colombia and Jalisco New Generation Cartel presence there, obviously interacting with the Cartel de los Soles, or the Venezuelan military. Could have Maduro given more broadening information? Absolutely. I don't think that's, and he has a breadth of knowledge because he's been doing this for decades. But to kind of directly link that to these recent military strikes that we've seen, it just doesn't pass the scrutiny test, because one of the ways I would push back is, even before this plea deal, we've seen record seizures on maritime routes in the Caribbean Sea, all the way back from 2024, and 2025 looks like it's going to shatter those records. In January 2025, the French Navy seized over 9 tons of cocaine in a maritime interdiction operation in the Caribbean. We've already seen law enforcement agencies. Now, obviously, we have the U.S. military. And when I include law enforcement, I'm also including Coast Guards in general, and the South American navies and European navies that are operating there have record seizure. What I would say, I don't think Mayo Zambada was key. I think other intelligence operations and law enforcement investigations, clearly somewhere between last year and this year, there was a break, because the amount of cocaine that has been seized is skyrocketing, and Mayo Zambada can maybe broadening much more information to prosecutors for them, for indictments against Maduro, which are already existing, et cetera, and some of that. But this actual idea that he was the missing link, and his information is the missing link that directly ties into these strikes. You and I, we both served. We know that's not how collection and targeting work, even dynamic and deliberate targeting. That's not how this operates. That's not how it wouldn't pass the sniff test for any military veteran who's done anything like this in the Middle East. It's the same here. So I think in the broad aspects, maybe, but we've already seen record seizures already last year and this year, even without this plea deal. So I don't think Mayo Zambada was that critical missing link.
Yeah, I totally agree on his ability to maybe add a little bit of a color to the portrait that was being painted. But if I had been out of the community for a year, I could still talk broadly, maybe about the tactics, techniques, and procedures that were being used when I was in, but I would have no knowledge about the specificity of what they're doing in real time. So there's no way that Maduro is going to be able to point and say this particular boat with these particular people, which leads to my other question. Why do you think it was these 2 vessels versus other vessels that might be out there? If all these seizures are up, how are they arriving at such a high level of fidelity that they're comfortable with kinetic strikes? Because I used to target people. Well, I didn't do the targeting. I would be sent out to either stop the vehicle, and depending on the actions taken by the people in vehicles, I never did this on a vessel. But even then, 100% certainty, I don't think I ever got something like that from even the highest level military intelligence officers, because you have to leave room for the fact you might be wrong. Your intelligence might be flawed or dated.
I mean, that's where I guess that's where the JAG always comes in and advises the commander about the legality of the strike, right? Like, everybody makes fun of military lawyers, but the general always, the first question the general asks, or whoever has strike authority, hey, lawyer, is this legal? That's the lawyer's job to give it to you, right? And no, I would agree. I think we've had a pretty clear picture. Now, the questioning, there's a legality, humanitarian law, international law about military strikes against drug traffickers. Look, in the end of the day, this is a new approach from the United States. My counter to that is we have seen, South American air forces shoot down drug planes because they wouldn't, abide by the rules. Like, hey, you need to, land. And they would refuse to land, and then you would see the air, various South American air forces have historically shot these planes down out of the sky, right? Obviously, this is a different scenario and situation, but it just kind of continues that, and we're starting to see much more. I think people are realizing there's a much more militarized approach, and time will tell if this is the right approach. But there's never going to be 100% certainty. The first strike that killed 11 people, really, I tweeted about this, but it's like that's weird. I've seen hundreds of videos of drug smugglers and narcos utilizing boats to ship drugs, right? I've seen hundreds of them, and 11 people on one boat just doesn't. I've never seen that many people, and it just doesn't make sense because you want to maximize cargo, not people. Generally, you see 2, 3, maybe 4. A lot of times it's just one. So something about that first one was a little bit weird and suspicious. I don't think anybody has really been asking the questions from a reporting side to try to get to the bottom of it. But, I do believe there's a high degree of certainty of what's going on. It's just the president made this decision to take lethal action because, again, like I said, we've seen a significant increase already in maritime routes. And to be honest, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this. They're maybe capturing 2, 3, 4, 5%. And that's true. And we've seen an explosion in cocaine smuggling. And that's kind of the problems that they're running into. And it's not only just a U.S. problem. Said a lot of South American countries and European navies are trying to address this problem, but it's impossible to catch it. If I may, Andy, just something you said in a previous question that I just wanted to bring up was the El Ruso, Ponce Felix, and that bounty on him. What I would say is, I don't even, again, it's not Mayo gave that critical information. I think this is what kind of he was already known to law enforcement. Now, the argument can be made is the reason why you like cooperating witnesses is because now you don't necessarily have to divulge intelligence. Right? It's a cooperating witness. There's nothing necessarily classified about that. They're giving information to prosecutors. Prosecutors have to go to court, public record. There might be sealed indictments, but it's kind of more in the open. But El Ruso was very well known to be a key figure of Mayo Zambada and now his son, Mayito Flaco. He was based out of Sonora, and we track his fighters. Like right now, they're very active in Sinaloa fighting their rival, Los Chapitos, Los Guanos, etc. And so, again, it's not necessarily an intelligence, because intelligence is more of the, your military intelligence, your CIA, NSA, NGA, all those 3-letter acronyms and agencies. I think this is it's easier for the Department of Justice because, a lot of times in intelligence reports, there will be an intelligence report with the caveat, this will not be used for any legal proceedings. That is a caveat in a lot of intelligence reports. Well, with a cooperating witness, you don't have to worry about that anymore. And I think it's more from the prosecution perspective that's why we're seeing a lot of these indictments and much more public reporting, because now it's not sources and methods, it's the testimony of a convicted drug kingpin.
Everybody, let's be real with each other for a second. Most doctors do not care about optimization. They do care about you, but they're checking your basic labs. They tell you that everything is looking normal, and they're going to send you on your way. Meanwhile, you're feeling tired, your performance is slipping, and you know that something is off, and that is where Marek Health comes in. Marek Health isn't your typical doctor's office. They're a next-level health optimization platform that actually listens to you, runs advanced lab testing, and helps you optimize your hormones, your metabolism, and your overall performance. So whether you're looking to boost your energy, maybe gain some muscle mass, or you just feel like you're not your best self anymore and you want to change that, Marek gives you those tools and can help you make it happen. You have two options. You can go with their guided optimization program and get a dedicated health coach and medical provider to help you with supplements and prescription treatments. Or if you're more of a do-it-yourself type of person, you can order self-service lab tests and take control of your health on your own terms. The best part is, either option that you pick, you can get 10% off of your order right now. Just go to marekhealth.com and use the code FOCALPOINT at checkout. That's MAREK health.com with the code FOCALPOINT for 10% off. Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, you can keep the means and methods secret. What, do you have any sense of, I guess it's just a personal question based off your experience and then maybe what you've seen on the, in the OSINT intelligence you have access to. Do you think it'll make an impact or change behaviors? And then in Venezuela, how is it being described?
You know, that's a very interesting question. And so the interesting aspects, and I'll try to go broad and then specific, is, you know, a lot of people thought that the first military strikes, that like from a counter-narcotics perspective, was going to be against Mexican cartels, and it's actually against Venezuela, right? So, you know, inside of Venezuela, you know, we are seeing the Maduro regime really amp up the propaganda. They're really trying to create this war footing, get people to mobilize, get higher recruitment to kind of solidify the power of Nicolas Maduro so he can continue to stay in power. And that kind of continues to this day. And that's where the biggest change is, you know, talking to Venezuelans, you know, there is this uneasiness, but not necessarily panic, if that makes sense. Like there's, okay, wait a minute. There's, okay, he did these strikes and we know we got videos of 2 strikes. President Trump, I believe it was yesterday in the morning press conference before he was heading out, he said, outside of Marine One, he said there was actually a 3rd one that wasn't publicly disclosed. So
God, that guy can't shut his
so
mouth.
there was 3 strikes, but the casualties, is, to your point, is 14, 11 in the first one and 3 in the second one. So again, inside Venezuela, we're really starting to see the propaganda aspect really amp up. We're starting to see the military deploy. They're really trying to push that. I would be the first one to say, Andy, I mean, if you want a good laugh, watch out these Venezuelan military propaganda videos. If you really want to laugh. So it's a Spanish joke. It's a Venezuelan joke. So one of the jokes they say is, because there's the militia. So part of the Venezuelan government, one of the components is called the Bolivarian militia. And they say, you know, the joke on Venezuelan, like TikTok, Twitter, etc., is son milicianos o mil ancianos. So it's saying, are they militiamen? And that translates, but how the word is either militiamen or 1,000 old people based on how they sounded, because all the people, I'm not even kidding, they're like 60, 70, 80 years old, right? And that's the running joke inside, even in Venezuela, mil ancianos, right? And so yes, you're seeing Maduro really try to amp up, but it's ludicrous. It's laughable, right? I think it's an opportunity for him to continue to consolidate power and even be more oppressive, using the war footing as an excuse. But in terms of drug trafficking, it's too fresh. It's really too new. I haven't seen much changes. And honestly, what, if anything, maybe if it becomes much more difficult, they'll just ship routes. They'll go a different way. Yeah. And we've actually seen other areas. We've seen in Ecuador has been a huge one through the Pacific, through the ports of Ecuador. This year, for the first time, actually, which kind of indicates maybe this is kind of, in a way, the future, the Colombian Navy seized a narco submarine that was completely autonomous, and it was using Starlink for navigation.
No way.
Yes. So the Colombian Navy seized that. Yes. And so, you know, again, you know, that's kind of the interesting aspects. And on these vessels, I mean, we focus on the United States, but the Portuguese law enforcement and Europol has seized multiple of these vessels off the Atlantic coast heading over to Europe, tracking all the way through, right? And these are adaptable organizations. They find different ports. Another thing we're seeing a lot in Europe is the rise of even their own drug labs being, instead of shipping drugs, final product there, they're building drug labs in Europe. And that's been a problem for years, where it's, you know, that's kind of increasing. We've seen detentions related to the Sinaloa Cartel in Poland. We've seen detentions of Sinaloa Cartel chemists in France. And so these are adaptable organizations. So if for whatever reason they decide, okay, maybe through Venezuela it's too hard, they'll just find a different route. And there's plenty of areas. Brazil is right there. Plenty of opportunities for them to expand and change routes. But right now we haven't really seen much change. But it's too soon. It's too fresh.
Yeah, it's hard to say which direction it's going to go. It certainly is crossing a line in the sand that the U.S. hasn't been across before. And, if I try not to let my conspiratorial hat run away from me sometimes. I try to keep it on the hanger, in the closet. And I guess maybe this isn't a conspiracy. I'm curious your thoughts. I could see an essence of this soft launching the idea of kinetic attacks farther away from the U.S. to expose that idea to citizens here. And then because I agree with you, I think most people expected, especially with the cartels being designated as FTOs, that the first kinetic strike was probably going to be somewhere in Mexico. But by soft launching this idea of kinetic attacks on drug smugglers a little bit farther away, I wonder if they think it will make it more palatable if we do actually cross the line in the sand with something in Mexico.
I mean, that's definitely a possibility, and that's something I actually haven't considered. What I've seen based on reporting, I think it was either Axios or the New York Times, was that the reasoning why they're doing this, because again, it's not still, it's huge that the fact that this is actually happening, but the quantity hasn't been that much. That one of the reporting and the thought process is they're trying to force the Venezuelan military to kind of panic and maybe lose money. And then that way they can force Maduro out of power. Kind of break the stronghold that Maduro has within the Venezuelan military, specifically the higher echelons, which constitute the Cartel de los Soles, to kind of give up Maduro. Because again, unlike the Sinaloa Cartel, Jalisco New Generation Cartel, that they use the name, they have the emblems, they have that. Like in reality, Cartel de los Soles is kind of a term that's used to describe the Venezuelan military, the higher echelon. It's not like an actual thing per se. It's not like the Sinaloa Cartel. It's just the Venezuelan military. This is the name that kind of describes them. And I think that's one of the reasons where it's almost like a maximum pressure campaign against Venezuela, but clearly the sanctions aren't working, diplomatic isolation isn't working. So let's add that extra component. So without necessarily going and maybe the next step, I'm at the belief it's more of a matter of when, not if, the United States conducts strikes inside of Venezuela. The question is, if they do that, do they target, let's say, the Venezuelan military, specifically higher echelons, or do they find groups such as maybe Tren de Aragua, but more importantly, I'm looking at ELN, certain FARC dissident groups, certain, narco labs inside of Venezuela or drug distribution systems in Venezuela, and they attack them. And so that way the U.S. can say, hey, I'm not attacking the Venezuelan government, I'm not attacking the Venezuelan military, but I'm attacking these drug trafficking organizations that you rely on to make money. I think that's the next step. And I think it's just kind of this maximum pressure campaign to get Maduro out of power. And honestly, it shouldn't be that surprising considering who's the Secretary of State and Interim National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio. It shouldn't be that surprising because this has been a huge issue for him. He's really wanted the U.S. to reprioritize Latin America, and he's always seen Maduro as the biggest threat to U.S. interests in South America.